In a decision that sent shockwaves through financial capitals across the globe, the United States Supreme Court struck down the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs, a move that few had predicted and even fewer were prepared for. Overnight, a trade strategy that had defined the second Trump presidency was brought to an abrupt halt, leaving both allies and adversaries scrambling to understand the new rules of engagement. The ruling was more than a technicality. It was a fundamental reassertion of Congress's constitutional authority over trade, a power that had gradually shifted toward the executive branch over decades. By challenging the president's ability to unilaterally direct the nation's economic relationships, the court reignited a debate that had simmered beneath the surface of American politics for years. Businesses long battered by unpredictable duties, retaliatory tariffs, and the constant threat of new trade wars, suddenly found themselves at a crossroads. Many faced the prospect of massive refunds for tariffs already paid, but also a new era of uncertainty as they tried to anticipate what Congress might do next. The administration, caught off guard by the sweeping nature of the decision, scrambled for a response as the news rippled from Wall Street to Shanghai, shaking investor confidence and prompting urgent calls between world leaders. This landmark case, sparked by a handful of determined importers who challenged the legality of the tariffs, has now forced a national reckoning. At stake is a fundamental question: who truly controls American trade policy? Congress, as the Constitution intended, or the President, as recent history has allowed? As the dust settles and the headlines fade, one thing is clear: the era of presidentially decreed tariffs is over, and the balance of power has shifted back to Capitol Hill. The future of U.S. trade is now up for grabs, with lawmakers, businesses, and trading partners all vying to shape what comes next in this new chapter of global commerce. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. When a product crosses a border, the government can charge a fee. This is the tariff. While the importer is responsible for paying this tax, the cost often trickles down to everyday consumers, who may notice higher prices on store shelves for imported items. In the early days of the United States, tariffs were a primary source of government revenue, helping to fund everything from infrastructure to the military before the federal income tax existed. Over time, the role of tariffs shifted. Today, they're mainly used as tools to protect domestic industries from foreign competition, to gain leverage in international trade negotiations, and to advance broader economic or political goals. Sometimes tariffs are also imposed for reasons tied to national security, such as protecting industries considered vital to a country's defense or economic stability. Presidents often turn to tariffs as a way to shield American businesses from what they see as unfair foreign competition, to pressure other governments into making concessions, or to quickly address emerging threats without waiting for Congress. The ability to act swiftly is especially appealing in times of crisis, allowing the president to respond to economic or security threats with immediate effect. For instance, imposing tariffs on imported steel can make American-made steel more attractive to buyers, supporting local jobs and industries that might otherwise struggle to compete. At the same time, the mere threat of new tariffs can be a powerful bargaining chip, bringing other countries to the negotiating table to strike new trade deals or resolve disputes. In recent years, presidents have increasingly cited national security as a justification for imposing tariffs quickly and unilaterally, sometimes bypassing the usual checks and balances of Congress. This broad interpretation of executive power, especially under laws like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, has sparked debate and set the stage for legal challenges reaching all the way to the Supreme Court. The Trump administration's use of tariffs pushed presidential authority to new limits, raising urgent questions about how much power the executive branch should have over trade policy and the economy. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision will determine whether the president can continue to wield tariffs as a solo instrument of economic policy, or if new limits will be set on this powerful tool. The Trump administration's so-called Liberation Day tariffs marked a dramatic escalation in the global trade landscape, targeting over 60 trading partners in a single sweeping move. This was not just another volley in the ongoing trade disputes, it was a bold, unprecedented assertion of American economic power on the world stage, signaling a new era of confrontation and uncertainty. The tariffs affected nearly 70% of all U.S. imports, touching almost every sector of the American economy. From electronics and machinery to everyday consumer goods, the impact was immediate and far-reaching, sending shockwaves through global supply chains and boardrooms alike. Long-standing allies like the European Union, Japan, and Canada suddenly found themselves facing steep new taxes on their exports to the US, straining diplomatic ties and sparking heated debates in international forums. Meanwhile, specific tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico were justified as part of a broader crackdown on fentanyl trafficking, intertwining trade policy with law enforcement in ways never seen before. This marked a fundamental shift, from targeted, sector-specific measures to a sweeping global tariff regime that blurred the lines between trade, law enforcement, and foreign policy. The administration was no longer just negotiating, it was rewriting the rules of engagement. The scale was unprecedented. From European cars and luxury goods to Mexican auto parts and agricultural products, few imports were spared from the new levies. Businesses scrambled to adapt, and consumers braced for higher prices. Additional executive actions rapidly expanded tariffs to cover hundreds of new products, creating a ripple effect that reached deep into the shelves of American stores and the operations of global manufacturers. The administration also eliminated duty-free exemptions for small packages, a move that crippled e-commerce and international shipping, making it harder for small businesses and consumers to access affordable goods from abroad. The message was unmistakable. The administration intended to use economic pressure as a primary tool of statecraft, leveraging America's market power to achieve broader policy goals. These sweeping measures created a towering tariff wall around the U.S. economy, isolating it from global competition and setting the stage for both legal and economic upheaval that would reverberate for years to come. The question now loomed larger than ever. Could the president really wield such immense power alone, or would the courts and Congress step in to draw the line? The legal battle over the tariffs was a constitutional clash over the separation of powers. Plaintiffs, importers, small businesses, and states argued the president had imposed illegal taxes without Congress's consent. The administration claimed broad authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, citing national emergencies like fentanyl trafficking. Plaintiffs countered that IEPA was never meant to allow sweeping nationwide tariffs functioning as massive taxes. Central to the case was the major questions doctrine. On issues of vast economic significance, only Congress can authorize such actions. The appeals court sided with the plaintiffs, ruling that the president had overstepped, and the Supreme Court took up the final decision. At stake, whether the power to tax and regulate trade truly belongs to Congress. The tariff's economic toll was immediate and widespread. Manufacturing and construction, reliant on imports, shed tens of thousands of jobs instead of gaining them. Consumers faced higher prices on everything from electronics to groceries, fueling inflation and shrinking household budgets. The Treasury collected nearly $500 billion in duties, but this revenue was a hidden tax on Americans. The looming legal challenge threatened a massive refund, up to $1 trillion, creating fiscal chaos for the government. Businesses hoped for relief, while the Treasury braced for an unprecedented payout. The stakes were enormous: jobs, prices, and the federal budget all hung in the balance. The Supreme Court's ruling would determine who paid the ultimate price. The Supreme Court's decision was a resounding defense of the Constitution's separation of powers. The majority ruled that only Congress can impose broad, economically significant tariffs. Executive action alone isn't enough. The court found no clear authorization in IEPA for the president to levy such sweeping duties. The justices drew a sharp line. The president can conduct foreign policy, but cannot unilaterally tax the nation. The tariffs, they concluded, were an unconstitutional executive tax system. The verdict didn't ban all presidential tariffs, but it set strict limits. Congress must explicitly approve major trade actions. The ruling reaffirmed Congress's authority over the nation's purse strings and commercial life. The Supreme Court's decision brings immediate relief and new challenges for businesses and consumers. Importers stop paying tariffs, and many anticipate massive refunds, though the process will be complex and contentious. Consumers should see lower prices as import costs fall, easing inflation and boosting household budgets. The government, however, faces a fiscal crisis: lost tariff revenue, and the obligation to issue refunds could blow a hole in the budget. The administration may seek new legal avenues to reimpose tariffs, setting up future battles. Businesses that shifted supply chains to avoid tariffs now face tough choices about whether to revert or adapt. Uncertainty will persist until Washington's next move is clear. The trade landscape has changed, but the path forward remains uncertain. The Supreme Court's ruling redraws the blueprint for U.S. trade policy, shifting power back to Congress. No longer can presidents use vague emergency powers to impose sweeping tariffs. Major trade actions now require explicit legislative approval. Trade policy will become more deliberative, debated in Congress, and subject to public scrutiny and political negotiation. This shift promises more stability and predictability for America's trading partners, ending the era of sudden unilateral tariff announcements. Allies may see this as a chance to rebuild economic ties on firmer ground. The president's role shifts from unilateral actor to chief negotiator, needing congressional support for major moves. Tariffs as a rapid response tool are now constrained by constitutional checks and balances. The future of American trade will be shaped by collaboration, not command. America stands at a crossroads for its trade future. The Supreme Court has returned tariff power to Congress, dismantling a key tool of executive action: the immediate aftermath refunds, price shifts, and business adaptation. The bigger question: will Congress forge a new bipartisan trade strategy, or will gridlock leave the nation adrift? The administration may seek new legal paths, but the era of sweeping executive tariffs is over. The world is watching to see what vision for trade will fill the void, and how America will lead in the global economy.